Specflow tutorial part 7 scenario hooks. In part 6 we have learned about scenario outline and parameterized steps. So in this session we are going to learn about Specflow hooks. So let me start this session. We have the concept of hooks in the Specflow, and hooks can be used to perform additional automation logic at a specific time, such as any setup is required prior to executing a scenario. Let me flip to Visual Studio to understand with an example. We have one project, we call it as a Specflow session project, and this Specflow session project we have created in the previous sessions. In the previous sessions we have added a few naked packages related to a Specflow, and we have also added a feature files related to event registration, and we have also added another feature file related to a login.feature. For all these steps we have added a step definitions. It means whatever the steps which we have written it in these files, they have a corresponding step definitions in the event register and then the login.cs file. In this session we are going to talk about Specflow hooks. So when we guys talking about the hooks, the first question comes in our mind: why do we need a hooks? Hook is a special type of the programming logic which we want to execute before performing some of the actions. Take an example: we want to read a few files, or you can say we want to set the automation environment before executing the test cases. It means we need a specific logic to be executed before executing the scenarios or before performing some of the actions. In the Specflow we have the concept of the hooks, and that help us to perform such type of the logic implementation. To implement the Specflow hooks, we already have a template. Right click on this project, go to add, we can say we have the new items, and inside the new items we have a Specflow, and we can see we have this Specflow hooks event binding. So let's give some meaningful name here. We can say Specflow hooks. Click on add, and it will add a Specflow hook.cs file for us. So we have a Specflow hooks class, and this Specflow hooks class is having a two methods. One is a before scenario, another is a after scenario. So this piece of code added when we have selected a template of the hooks. One is a before scenario, another is a after scenario, and these two methods tagged, or you can say hooked, with the two different hooks, those are available with the Specflow. One is a before scenario and another is a after scenario. So let's do one thing. Let's see the hooks one by one. Those will be executed first. We can explore those first. So let's have a method here, public void, we can say before test run, and this before test run, let's give a u in a meaningful name. Now whenever you want to tag any of the method with the hook, then you need to use a square brackets, and inside the square brackets, if you want to add a hook related to a before test run, then use a before, and we can see we have a different hooks available. One is a before test run. So when we have added this before test run hook on the top of the any of the method, then that method will be executed before any piece of code. It means if you are trying to execute your automation framework, then the first control will commit here in this before test, and we use this before test run hook to set the configuration of the automation framework. I take an example of when you are executing your automation framework and you are executing your test cases, you need to read the configuration file so that the information that is present in that particular configuration file we can execute, or you can say we can use in a whole automation framework. At that point of time we need to use this before test run. So whenever you use a before test run, the method needs to be static. Right now this method is not static, so let's have a static. Provide a message here, we can say console.writeLine, and inside the writeLine we can say this will be executed before executing any of the code, and this will help us to set the config the framework. We have another hook for a test run. That hook is of a after test run. So let's have a method here. We can say public void, and here is the after test run, and let's have a tag to this particular method. We can say after, and here is the after test run. So we have marked this particular method, we call it as a after test run method with the after test run hook. So this method will be executed after executing all the automation framework test cases, or you can say after executing all the feature files, those we are going to execute it. similar way, we have marked this particular method, we call it as a static. So we also need to mark this particular method, which is after test run for this particular hook, as a static as well. So let's have this static here. Now let's provide us some message here, console.writeLine. This will be called at the end of your execution. We have added a two hooks. One is a before test run, another is a after test run. We have other hooks as well. Those are related to a feature file. We call it as a before feature file, another is a after feature file. So let's add a method and add a hook as well. Public void, we can say before feature, the method name, and then tag this particular method with the hook. You can say before feature. Okay, so we have marked this before feature method with a hook. We call it as a before feature hook. So this method will be invoked or will be called only once for each feature file. Take an example of right now we have two feature files. One is the event registration.feature file and another is a login.feature file. It means whenever we are going to execute our automation framework, this method will be called two times because we have two feature files. If we have one feature file, then this method will be called only once. So this method will be called depending upon the number of feature files you are executing at that point of time. This before feature method will be invoked before executing any scenarios those are present in the feature files. If this login.feature file is having a two scenario, then this before feature method will be invoked before executing any scenarios in the login.feature files. So let's have a message here, say console.writeLine, and we can give this will be executed only once for another part related to a before feature hook. Whenever you are mentioning any method with the hook, we call it as a before feature, then that method needs to be static. The way we have mentioned it for after test run and a before test run, we need to mark this before feature method as a static as well. So let's have a static here. And on the similar basis, we have created a before feature hook. We can also create another method or another hook. We can add it. We call it as a after feature. So let's have a method here, public void. We can see after feature, and let's have a message here, console.writeLine. This will be executed at the feature file. Let's mark this method with a hook. We call it as a after feature. So this after feature method we have marked with the hook. We call it as a after feature, and this method will be invoked only once after executing all the scenarios of that particular feature file. Again, the way we have mentioned this before feature as a static, we need to mark this one as a static as well. So we have another hooks as well. One is a before scenario, another is after scenario. So these hook provided by the template to us. So this before scenario hook will be executed before executing any of the scenarios. So let's have this console.writeLine. We can say this will be executed before executing the scenario. So this before scenario method will be executed only once for each scenario. It means if you have three scenarios in a feature files, then this before scenario hook will be executed 3 times. On the other hand, this after scenario hook will be executed after executing the scenario. So let's have a message here, console.writeLine, and let's have a message here. This will be executed after executing the scenario. We have two more hooks. One is let's have it, we can say before step, and let's have a before step hook here. You can say before, and here is the step. So this before step hook will be executed before executing any of the steps of the scenario. So let's have a message here, console.writeLine. So we can say be executed for executing steps of the scenario. If we have 10 steps, this before step will be executed 10 times. On the same hand, we have a before step hook. We also have a after step hook as well. So let's have it void. We can say after step, and we can provide a message here, console.writeLine. This will be executed. We are executing steps of the scenario. So let's mark this method with a hook. We call it as a after step. Depending upon the scenario and the usage, we can use these different hooks. Those are available with us. Whenever you are mentioning any hooks in the class, then you have to use a keyword. We call it as a binding keyword. And with respect to the before test run, before feature, after test run, and after feature, we need to mark the methods as a static. If you talk about the additional resources, I have already created one course that is on the Udemy, and that course help you to learn a professional automation framework creation with the C#, Specflow, and the Selenium. So that course is going to help us to create an enterprise level automation framework with the different design patterns, builder design pattern, singleton design pattern, a strategy design pattern, and dependency injection design pattern. So this is the one of the most important design pattern where we guys are not creating the object with the help of the new operator. So this dependency injection design pattern helping us to create the object without utilizing a new operator. Another is a IOC design pattern. So these all design patterns helping a automation framework which we have created in this Udemy course, making a more robust and a more reliable as well. So this course help us to build the thought pattern for designing and targeting the framework, and this course also help us to build the capabilities to understand any complex code base. So after completing the course, you will able to create your own professional level automation framework. After completing this course, you will able to create your own professional level automation framework from the scratch, not with this language but with the other languages as well, because a framework development is not dependent on any of the language. So framework code also uploaded with the course. If you want, you can enroll that particular course on the Udemy. Please subscribe this channel to have the notifications of a new automation related sessions.